The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing. In June of 1982, Universal Pictures released what they believed would be a summer blockbuster to compete with E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Instead, The Thing became one of the most critically savaged films of the year and a catastrophic box office failure, earning just $19 million against its $15 million budget. Critics destroyed it. Roger Ebert gave it 2.5 stars, calling it a barf-bag movie, and stating he found it disappointing due to superficial characterizations. Variety dismissed it as a wretched excess film. The Los Angeles Times called it a dreary, redundant exercise in sadism that fails to generate suspense or terror. Vincent Canby of the New York Times wrote that the film was too phony-looking to be disgusting and too grim to be funny, calling it instant junk. Audiences stayed away in droves, choosing Spielberg's friendly alien over Carpenter's shape-shifting nightmare. The film was such a disaster that it effectively ended Carpenter's relationship with major studios and damaged his reputation for years. Universal executives considered it an embarrassment, quickly pulling it from theaters after just a few weeks. The complete reversal began in the late 1980s and accelerated through home video. As horror fans revisited The Thing on VHS and later DVD, they recognized what critics had missed. Rob Bottin's practical effects work represented a pinnacle of the craft that has never been surpassed. Kurt Russell delivered one of his finest performances as helicopter pilot MacReady, and Carpenter's mounting paranoia and isolation created unbearable tension. The film's nihilistic ending, which critics hated, became celebrated as one of cinema's most perfect conclusions. By the 2000s, The Thing regularly appeared on best horror films ever made lists. Critics who initially panned it began writing retrospective pieces praising its brilliance. In 2011, the British Film Institute's poll of critics and filmmakers ranked it among the greatest science fiction films of all time. Entertainment Weekly called their original negative review one of their biggest mistakes. The film now holds an 84% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes with a 92% audience score, complete validation for a movie once considered career-ending garbage. Trick or Treat, Trick or Treat. Director Michael Dougherty's Halloween anthology film was supposed to receive a wide theatrical release from Warner Brothers in October of 2007. The studio loved early test screenings, marketing materials were prepared, and the film played to enthusiastic responses at film festivals. Then, Warner Brothers abruptly pulled it from the release schedule without explanation, eventually dumping it straight to DVD in October of 2009, 2 full years after completion. The few critics who reviewed it during its festival run gave mixed responses, with many dismissing it as a gimmicky anthology without substance. Variety called it an ambitious but uneven horror anthology. The Hollywood Reporter noted that while visually impressive, the interlocking stories felt forced and overly cute. Without theatrical release, the film seemed destined to become a forgotten curiosity, a studio cast-off that would vanish into direct-to-video obscurity alongside countless other abandoned horror projects. Home video transformed Trick or Treat into an annual Halloween tradition. Horror fans discovered it through word of mouth and online recommendations, finding that Dougherty had crafted the perfect Halloween movie. The anthology structure allowed different types of horror, from the gruesome werewolf transformation, to the creepy Principal Wilkins's dark secret, to the shocking twist with the school bus massacre. Sam, the burlap sack-wearing trick-or-treater who serves as the film's spirit of Halloween, became an instant icon despite never appearing in theaters. The film's insistence on respecting Halloween traditions or facing deadly consequences resonated with audiences who grew up loving the holiday. Every October, new viewers discover it and add it to their annual viewing rotation. By 2015, the film had sold enough DVDs and Blu-rays to warrant serious discussion of a sequel. Warner Brothers executives admitted their decision to skip theatrical release was a mistake. The film now maintains an 82% critic score and a 78% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with the audience score rising every Halloween as more people discover what critics initially dismissed. Jennifer's Body. When Diablo Cody followed her Academy Award-winning Juno screenplay with a horror film starring Megan Fox, critics sharpened their knives before the film even opened in September of 2009. Reviews were brutal. The New York Times dismissed it as a toothless horror comedy that squanders its potential. Critics focused relentlessly on Megan Fox's sex appeal and her tabloid relationship with Brian Austin Green, treating the film as exploitative trash designed to showcase Fox in revealing outfits rather than examining what Cody's script actually said about female friendship and predatory male behavior. Marketing leaned heavily into Fox's sexuality, essentially selling the film as teenage boy fantasy material. The campaign backfired catastrophically. Teenage boys didn't show up for a movie about female relationships, and women stayed away from what looked like objectification disguised as empowerment. empowerment. Jennifer's Body earned only $31.6 million worldwide against its $16 million budget, barely breaking even before marketing costs. Fox's career stalled. Cody faced accusations of being a one-hit wonder, and the film seemed destined to be remembered as a cautionary tale about sophomore slumps. The feminist reappraisal began around 2015 and exploded by 2018. Writers revisiting Jennifer's Body recognized Cody's script as sharp commentary on how men consume and destroy women. Literally, in Jennifer's case, after a band sacrifices her to Satan. The film explores toxic female friendship, survival after sexual assault, and the complicated dynamics between Amanda Seyfried's Needy and Fox's Jennifer. With surprising depth, Fox's performance, once dismissed as wooden, revealed itself as deliberately playing with her public persona and the male gaze. The film's bisexual subtext, which critics ignored in 2009, became celebrated as groundbreaking representation. Academic papers were written analyzing the film's themes. Fox experienced a career resurgence, partly due to reappraisal of her work in Jennifer's Body. In 2018, Cody and director Karen Kusama participated in 10th anniversary retrospectives, where they discussed how the film was ahead of its time. Jennifer's Body now appears on lists of essential feminist horror, with many critics who panned it publishing pieces admitting they completely misunderstood what Cody and Kusama achieved. The Descent, Neil Marshall's 2005 British horror film about 6 women trapped in an unexplored cave system with humanoid creatures, received positive critical response in the United Kingdom upon initial release, though some reviewers expressed concern about whether the creatures were necessary. Empire magazine gave it 4 out of 5 stars, with critic Dan Jolin calling it brutal, bloody, terrifying, astonishing, and the most significant Brit chiller since 28 Days Later. Several reviewers praised the film's claustrophobic first half, focusing on the women's relationships and the oppressive cave exploration, though some questioned whether the second half's creature horror matched the psychological intensity of the opening. The Guardian gave it 3 stars, suggesting the film worked better as survival horror than monster movie. The film performed well in UK theaters and generated strong word of mouth among British horror fans, who appreciated Marshall's commitment to genuine scares and his all-female cast. American release in August of 2006 transformed The Descent into a modern classic. American critics embraced it enthusiastically, with many calling it the best horror film of the decade. The New York Times praised its visceral intensity and commitment to genuine terror. Rolling Stone gave it 3.5 stars, celebrating both Marshall's direction and the all-female cast's performances. American audiences responded to the film's relentless tension and the way it balanced psychological horror in the first half with creature horror in the second half. The film became a massive success on home video in the United States, with horror fans celebrating it as proof that intelligent horror films with strong female characters could succeed without compromise. The enthusiastic American reception influenced British critics to reassess their initial reviews, with retrospective pieces acknowledging Marshall's achievement deserved more credit than some early reviews provided. The Descent now holds an 86% critics score and a 79% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with the film regularly appearing on Best Horror of the 2000s lists. By the way, if you're into this kind of content, I create videos like this all the time. Subscribing would really help out. Freddy vs. Jason. Freddy vs. Jason. When New Line Cinema finally brought together their 2 biggest horror franchises in August of 2003, critics treated it with contempt reserved for obvious corporate cash grabs. Entertainment Weekly gave it a D, dismissing it as a cynical exercise in brand management masquerading as a movie. The New York Times called it witless and boring, a film that insults both franchises and the intelligence of anyone who buys a ticket. Critics complained that the film had no internal logic, that the premise of Freddy Krueger manipulating Jason Voorhees made no sense, and that the entire project existed solely to extract money from nostalgic fans. The screenplay by Damian Shannon and Mark Swift was mocked as barely functional, with reviewers suggesting a child could have written something more coherent. Major publications ran think pieces about how horror franchises had reached creative bankruptcy, using Freddy vs. Jason as primary evidence of the genre's degradation into mindless schlock. The film earned a 42% critics score on Rotten Tomatoes, with Metacritic assigning it 37 out of 100 based on 29 reviews. Horror fans completely disagreed with critics and made the film a massive hit. Freddy vs. Jason earned over $116 million worldwide against its $30 million budget, proving enormous audience appetite for the crossover that fans had demanded since the 1980s. Audiences loved seeing Robert Englund return as Freddy Krueger for the first time since Wes Craven's New Nightmare in 1994. They appreciated that director Ronnie Yu took the premise seriously, delivering spectacular practical effects and genuine scares despite the inherent absurdity absurdity. The final battle between Freddy and Jason at Camp Crystal Lake gave fans exactly what they paid for: two horror icons fighting to the death with creative kills and memorable one-liners. Fan communities online defended the film passionately, arguing that critics fundamentally misunderstood what made franchise crossovers work. The film's success validated New Line's decision and proved that audiences cared more about entertainment value than critical approval. Over 20 years later, Freddy vs. Jason maintains its 42% critic score, but a 64% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with horror fans still celebrating it as one of the most fun theatrical experiences of the 2000s. The Fog. John Carpenter followed Halloween's massive success with a ghost story about vengeful spirits emerging from fog to attack a coastal California town. When The Fog opened in February of 1980, critics were disappointed. Variety called it a letdown after Halloween, lacking that film's sustained tension. Roger Ebert gave it 2 stars, writing that Carpenter picked the wrong story, though he directs it with a flourish. The New York Times noted the film looked great, but had no real substance beneath the atmosphere. Critics expected Carpenter to revolutionize horror again, and instead received what they considered a competent but unexceptional ghost story. The comparison to Halloween haunted every review, with critics treating The Fog as evidence that Carpenter might be a one-hit wonder who got lucky with his previous film. Vincent Canby suggested Carpenter had nothing new to say, and was simply recycling old ideas from better films. The film performed moderately at the box office, earning $21 million against its $1 million budget, but the critical response damaged Carpenter's momentum and made studios question his viability as a major director. Reappraisal over the following decades recognized what critics missed about The Fog's deliberate simplicity and mastery of atmosphere. Horror scholars began writing about how Carpenter crafted a classical ghost story using modern filmmaking techniques, creating something that felt timeless rather than dated. The film's exploration of guilt and historical sins, with Antonio Bay's founders having murdered sailors to steal their gold a century earlier, provided thematic depth that initial reviews ignored. Dean Cundey's cinematography, particularly his use of light and shadow to create the fog itself as a character, gained recognition as some of the most beautiful work in horror cinema. Carpenter's score, which he composed himself, became celebrated as one of his finest musical achievements. The ensemble cast, including Adrienne Barbeau, Jamie Lee Curtis, Janet Leigh, and Hal Holbrook, gave the film gravitas that critics in 1980 dismissed as wasted on material beneath them. Modern critics recognize The Fog as a perfect example of Carpenter's ability to elevate simple premises through technical mastery and understanding of genre conventions. The film now holds a 76% critics score and a 64% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with retrospective reviews frequently calling it an underrated gem in Carpenter's filmography. Happy Death Day. Happy Death Day. Christopher Landon's 2017 time-loop slasher mashed up Groundhog Day with a college campus murder mystery, following sorority girl Tree Geldman as she repeatedly relives the day of her murder while trying to identify her killer. Critics gave it mixed reviews. The Guardian gave it 2 stars, calling it a shameless ripoff that brings nothing new to either the time-loop concept or the slasher genre. IndieWire criticized its PG-13 rating, arguing that sanitizing a slasher film robbed it of any potential edge or authenticity. Several reviewers mocked the premise as something that sounded funny as a pitch but collapsed under feature-length execution, with Time Out London calling it a one-joke movie that exhausts itself in the first 15 minutes. Critics complained that star Jessica Ruth lacked the charisma to carry an entire film and that the script's attempts at character growth felt forced and manipulative. The Wrap suggested the film proved Hollywood had completely run out of original ideas and was now just randomly combining successful concepts from previous decades without understanding what made those films work. Audiences had completely different reactions, making Happy Death Day a sleeper hit. The film earned over $125 million worldwide against its $4.8 million budget, an extraordinary return that justified an immediate sequel. Viewers responded to Jessica Roth's committed performance, watching her transform Tree from a shallow mean girl into someone who learns empathy through repeated trauma. The time loop mechanic allowed creative variations on the murder mystery, with Tree testing different theories about her killer's identity and dying in increasingly inventive ways. The PG-13 rating, which critics hated, actually expanded the audience to include younger horror fans who couldn't see R-rated films. Landon's script balanced genuine scares with surprising humor, creating a tone that felt fresh rather than derivative. Online communities celebrated the film as proof that horror could experiment with structure and character development while still delivering satisfying genre thrills. Happy Death Day currently holds a 72% critics score and a 73% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with the audience score climbing as more people discover it through streaming and home video. Bride of Chucky. After 3 increasingly dark Child's Play films, director Ronnie Yu and writer Don Mancini took the franchise in a radical new direction in 1998, transforming Chucky from pure horror villain into a wisecracking lead character in a horror comedy romance. Critics hated it. Entertainment Weekly gave it a D-, calling it a franchise-killing mistake that abandons everything that made Child's Play scary. The Chicago Tribune complained that turning Chucky into comedy undermined years of building him as a genuinely frightening character. Several reviewers were particularly harsh about Jennifer Tilly's performance as Tiffany, Chucky's girlfriend who gets trapped in a bride doll, with critics calling it shrill and obnoxious. The film's self-aware humor and references to other horror films seemed to critics like desperate attempts to mask a terrible script with winking irony. Variety suggested the Child's Play series should be permanently retired after this embarrassing misstep, arguing that franchises that couldn't take themselves seriously deserved to die. Horror fans embraced exactly what critics hated about Bride of Chucky. The film earned over $50 million worldwide, the highest gross of any Child's Play film to that point, proving audiences wanted the franchise to evolve rather than repeat the same formula endlessly. Fans loved watching Brad Dourif's Chucky interact with Jennifer Tilly's Tiffany, creating a twisted romantic comedy about 2 serial killers trying to find human bodies while bickering like a married couple. The film's tonal shift influenced horror comedy for the next decade, proving that franchises could reinvent themselves through genre blending rather than just producing endless sequels. Yu's direction brought visual flair and genuine craft to material that could have been cheap and lazy. The film launched a new direction for the franchise, leading to Seed of Chucky, Curse of Chucky, Cult of Chucky, and the Chucky television series, all of which owe their existence to Bride of Chucky's successful reinvention. Don Mancini credits Bride of Chucky with saving the franchise from extinction, arguing that another straight horror sequel would have killed interest permanently. The film holds a 45% critics score, but a 52% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, with horror fans consistently defending it as the moment Child's Play became truly interesting. If you found this worthwhile, consider subscribing so you never miss new uploads. Thanks for watching.